Productive Pastor 105, how I build out my day. What's going on, friends? Welcome back to Productive Pastor, where we're having a conversation about healthy ministry through strategic productivity. I'm Chad Brooks, your host, and as always, I'm stoked to have you on the show. Thanks for letting me into your ears or into your car or wherever you listen to Productive Pastor. Excited about jumping in. I've been hinting about this the last few episodes, but now is the time to talk all about it. I've got something super exciting going on this Memorial Day weekend. I'm releasing a course that's only for sale those 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday of Memorial Day weekend, May the 24th through the 27th. But what is this, Chad? Well, it's the Productive Pastor Planner Template Pack. Say that 5 times fast. I've been trying to. I can't. I just can't get through it. But this is what's going on. Many of you have downloaded my day sheet. I think I've been sharing some version of this for almost a decade now. From what I can tell, it's easily over 1,200 people have downloaded some version of this throughout all of its iterations. It's also been part of the Becoming Productive course. I've used it all over the place, but that's just a tiny bit of it because people know how much I love planners, I love notebooks, that sort of stuff. And off and on, folks have asked me, Chad, why don't you just do a planner? Well, that's not my style, my friends. That's really not my speed. But what I am releasing is a pack with multiple templates that I use each day as part of my working notebook strategy. And I'm going to be talking about a working notebook a lot in this episode. But you'll get all of them. It's only $27 plus some video content walking through them, some video content of like how you can build out a working notebook, either in analog or in the digital. So if you're interested in this, make sure you go over the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/105, and you sign up for the wait list. And this wait list is not just a way to get an email saying the card is open. I've got 8 days of like super killer content that dives deep into how we can use templates to build our appropriate ministry planner. Not the perfect one. The perfect one doesn't exist. I talk about that a lot in this waitlist sequence. So even if you don't, get the planner pack, just the waitlist emails provide incredible value about how we can find the ways that we naturally might structure some sort of a ministry planner. So again, go to the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/105. Sign up for that wait list. And if you're part of the Productive Pastor email already and you haven't seen the announcement email, it's in your spam box somewhere. You can go find it. And there's a link to all you do is click on one button and it automatically signs you up for that wait list. But I'm so excited to do this way, rather than just doing a discount on courses like I normally do for these big sale weekends. I've got something special just for you. And it's the only time it'll be available. And it's cheap. $27. You're going to spend roughly that on a planner that you may or may not end up using. So why not learn how to create the ideal planner that works for you in ministry? So that's it. That's the front matter. Let's go on to this idea of how I build out my day. Now, listen, I mentioned a lot of other episodes inside of this. The beauty of years and years of Productive Pastor content and several years of this iteration of the podcast going on is if this is like something that really, really gets you going, there's other episodes you can listen to learn more about this, to talk about, what does that ideal day look like, but more tactically, how do you build out that day? So the first thing I want to talk to you about is this, and this is not new whatsoever at all, but know what you are doing. Here's the thing. You don't do what you don't know. I'll say that again. You don't do what you don't know. So many times I work with pastors that step into any ministry day and they don't have any sort of a plan. And what they realize they do is they just live in reactive mode all day long. And reactive mode is what makes us tired. Reactive mode makes it to where we feel like we spend our whole day not doing the thing we got into ministry for, the things that energize us, the things that we love doing, the things that we're naturally gifted at, but also the things that help our ministry move forward. Now, I remember, and I tell this story all the time, where I was in my first full-time appointment as a United Methodist pastor. I'd worked in ministry for almost a decade before this. I'd even worked in full-time ministry before this, but I remember I was 2 or 3 months into the appointment. I was still in that honeymoon zone. The staff and the senior pastor had not necessarily realized, okay, what are the things we can have Chad run point on that he can spend his time doing? And it was an inordinately slow week. It was like Tuesday afternoon, and my sermon was done. The only kind of primary responsibility I had at that church was preaching our weekly contemporary worship service and leading that congregation of our church. And I realized, like, I'm done for the day, and I've got several more days of work ahead of me. What am I going to do? And it was at that point I realized, oh my goodness, Chad, if you don't have a plan, you're going to spend your time doing things that might not actually matter that much. And here's the thing. So much of pastoral ministry, the ministry of presence, the ministry of relationships, all those sorts of things, if we're just waiting for stuff to fall in front of us, to fall in front of our desk, we may or may not really know what the best step forward is. So even if you're driving, and I've worked with pastors before with like significant relationship building strengths in Clifton Strength Finders, there's a way we can strategically think about how we do about that. So you don't want to step into a day not having any sort of a plan. The typical day of just reactivity will be exhausting. I remember when I worked in a restaurant, sometimes I would close and sometimes I would open. Now let's talk about this. Now, how ineffective or how frustrating or how not fulfilling would it be if you worked in a restaurant if the typical day was you just make sure you get there 5 minutes before the doors open and you open it up and then you just start like working the restaurant. Now, if you ever worked in a restaurant, you would know, oh my goodness, Chad, that's absolute chaos. I remember when I worked in a restaurant, and very rarely did I open, but sometimes I did, I would have to get there an hour, if not an hour and a half before we actually opened for business, because there was a whole checklist of the things we did to make sure that when we opened the door that we were able to, run effectively and do that. There was a little bit of prep that had to happen. I had to turn on the coffee machines and start making the first round of drip coffee. I had to make sure the espresso machine was turned on and was working properly. I had to make sure that the tables and the chairs were there, that the trash had been taken out the night before. Part of starting the day well is making sure the day before ended well. We're going to talk about that later on this episode. And so knowing what you're doing, it matters so much. And I'm able to do this really well each week with my weekly preview. I have episode 47. It's the Sunday preview where I talk about going through this. And there's really two things I do during that weekly preview that are helpful. And I have a template for this as part of the Productive Pastor Planner template pack. I said that fast and didn't stumble over it. I'm going to give myself a gold star right there. But in the weekly preview, I do two things. Number one is I answer 3 questions, and I'll talk about this in the episode. What's the most important thing for me to focus on this week? What's the most important thing for me to start this week? What's the most important thing for me to finish this week? And I declare that before things go into it. And then I start blocking out my week. I open up my calendar, see what appointments I have, see if I'm traveling or if I'm on the road. I look in my Trello weekly dashboard, which is a huge thing for me. I have a whole course on Trello for personal ministry. I talk about the weekly dashboard. I give out a template for that as well inside of that course. But I look at all the things that I know might be going on that week. I look at my 3 questions and how I answered those. And then I do big blocks. And what I like to do is I like to do AM blocks and PM blocks. And so I make sure I've got the time to do the sermon preparation I need to do because I still have that going on in my life. I make sure if I'm traveling that I orient my week in the way to know, hey, Chad, you're going to be driving a bunch. Maybe what are some things you can accomplish, like phone calls, check-ins, that kind of stuff, as you are driving? What does it look like to know, hey, whenever I'm traveling, I typically travel at the front end of the week, to know, hey, the sermon stuff that you like to get done every week, do you have the time to do that in the afternoons or in the evening or in the morning? That sort of a thing. I block out my week to know what's going on. I check in with my weekly dashboard and I'll be aware of, okay, what projects and what might be a handful of focuses on these projects that if they did not show up in those 3 questions that I know I can take care of this week. And I make sure those are stuck in the appropriate days there. And then I build out my Monday day sheet because I don't like to sit down in the morning and not have a plan already. And this is the only day that I have. So I build out that Monday day sheet on Sunday night. And then my weekly preview meeting with myself is done. There's multiple templates that I use to do that are part of this Productive Pastor Planner template pack. So the first thing is this: know what you are doing. I love that quote. You don't do what you don't know. It's so important that if there's any takeaway from this episode, that's it. You don't know what you don't do. The second thing is this, is I live off of my day sheet. Now, different iterations of this have been done over and over throughout the years, and I've got a brand new version of this as part of the Productive Pastor Planner template pack. And relax, even if you don't get that pack, you'll have access. There'll be ways I give that out. You can still get the previous version, the most current version, for public release. There's a link to that in the show notes. But I like to operate off what I call a fixed schedule. Episode 52 of the podcast is about fixed schedule productivity. It is deeply influenced by Cal Newport and his idea of time block planning. Did a conversation for episode, I think 99 and a half. It was episode 99 and a half with my friend Cal Newport. And not Cal, I wish I would have had Cal on the podcast. That'd be a heck of a goal. But with Reverend Colin Bagby, and we talk about this idea of time block planning. I swear by this because it helps me not be reactive and stay in proactive mode. And my day sheet is the best way for me to really, schedule and manage that. My Trello weekly dashboard, this has these fixed recurring tasks that I know I try to do every single Monday, every single Tuesday. And I've got those set up where those can happen regardless of where I am, if I'm at home or if I'm in a hotel room at 7 a.m., knocking out a handful of things. Those are the tiny, huge tasks that I've talked about a lot on the podcast. But what I really do the majority of my work, where I live in every single day, is what I call my working notebook. I did an episode about the working notebook. It's episode 34. I told y'all I'm referencing back to so much stuff that is core for Productive Pastor in this episode. But my working notebook now lives in the digital world. It was an analog world for a long time, and back then I still used a handful of sheets and templates, and I would just print them out in 8.5 by 11, and I'd fold them in half and just shove them in there. I've since moved into this idea that the working notebook happens month by month. And I used this analog with the cheap little Muji notebooks. And I would just use one for the month. And when the month was over, I would, archive that notebook. I've got boxes of old working notebooks because, your working notebook is also a fantastic archive, especially when you're ordering it month by month by month and year by year by year. But inside of my working notebook, each day I have got my day sheet, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more, and I've got my daily log, which is a new thing, and that sits there. But then I also just have blank pages that I can use. My working notebook is where I handle critical tasks. It's where I think through things, and I have ideas, and I design stuff out. I lead with a lot of strategic thinking strengths, which means I have to think about the work I am doing, and I think inside of my working notebook. I also have specific templates that I use for all different sorts of meetings. Those are part of the Productive Pastor template. I messed it up that time. Those are part of the Productive Pastor Planner template pack as well. But each day, I just work and use that notebook until the day is done. Now, a core part of that is I have that day sheet. I've dropped that in there. And so I'm back and forth in that all day long as I'm running the plan that I have, but I'm also seeing what kind of changes. And there's a difference between reactive and responsive. We have to be responsive in ministry. And so what I do is I plan out my day in black ink. And then for the all day long, as I'm sitting there and going back to that sheet back and forth in GoodNotes, whether it's on my desktop or whether it's on my iPad, I make changes in blue ink, or I might type this stuff in there, but I always do that in blue ink. So I can see at the end of the day, like, how well was I able to stick to my plan? Now, sometimes that sticking to the plan is because, things changed a lot and I have a lot of blue ink. Sometimes there's a lot of blue ink on that page because I'm really distracted that day or really frantic. I'm not maybe at my best mental space and I just get diverted a lot. Like today, I'm looking at what that sheet looks like today, and a little bit of both happened. And there's already a decent amount of blue ink on that page. But that day sheet is so powerful, not just to keep a time log or to do time audits, which is one of the things that you can do. I did an early episode. I think it's episode 2 it's episode 2 or 3 of the podcast about time audits. But that's just the beginning point of that tool. The biggest thing for me now is how I can see the ways that I'm working and the ways I might need to change and adapt. I'm going to do an episode in a couple of weeks about how my vocational life has really changed significantly over the last 6 months, the last year, and it's required some adaptation. It's required some changes. It's required some shifts in the way that I do work. Because of that, I've added a second worksheet into my day-to-day, and that's my daily log. And that's where I just keep account of what drops in my lap, the texts, the calls that come in, the little things that I realize, wow, I might not have planned for this, but I need to take care of this real quick. David Allen and his quintessential book on productivity, Getting Things Done, that might be the first book, the great-great-grandfather of the productivity movement. He talks about 2-minute tasks. If something comes in front of you, you can get it done in 2 minutes. Just go ahead and do it then. Don't save it for a later date. In a lot of ways, my working notebook and my whole approach to personal productivity is based off of the Getting Things Done philosophy and the idea of 43 folders. I've talked about that in previous episodes. It's this idea of having a place to put tasks to land, of when to do them. But if something comes up and it's a 2-minute task, I do it right then and there, or I try to save 5 or 6 of them and maybe take care of them in a couple of hours. But I enter all that stuff in my daily log. Really, right now in my ministry world, there's a dance that's going back and forth between the day sheet and the daily log, where I am trying to understand what does it mean to work well, in a way that's helpful, in a way that's energizing. So it's energizing to me, it's helpful for other people, and it's also letting me be responsible for the bigger picture, which I am getting a significant larger level of responsibility for. The third thing that I do is I just work. I go about my day to day. I do almost every single thing in my working notebook. That way I can go back and find it, because how many times are you working with something that you know you're going to have to come back to in a few days, or you're maybe designing out what a process or a system or what, the checklist, or what the steps in the process might need to be, or you're needing to go back and refer to a meeting that you had with someone, all of that stuff. I do that in my daily working notebook. I brought up meetings, and I have a lot of meetings now, and what I've learned is to develop meeting templates, sometimes that are specific to the same type of meeting I have to have over and over. Then also I have a generic meeting template that's going inside of the day-to-day. I have templates for meetings. I used to have a lot back when I was running staff, and I would do staff one-on-one meetings. And I have these templates set up to make sure things don't slip through cracks. Developing templates for your working notebook can be really helpful if you know you're having to gain a competency in something, or if you know that you're having to grow in an area, and what that template makes you do is not forget about the things that might not be natural to you. And sometimes they're just about taking really good notes that you might need in the future. And so I just work. I do my day inside of that working notebook. The last thing that I do each day is I kind of close work day down. And I talked about this, in the last episode about my, quick closing 10, 15-minute meeting with myself as I just go through the day. I can move tasks over. One of the things I love about GoodNotes is I can use the lasso tool to circle something. I can copy it, and then I can paste it over into the next day. Sometimes I have days where I might have a priority task that does not get done, or it might not get done at the level I want it to get done. So I can just kind of lasso where I am at that day and copy paste it over into the next day. So I always will create my day sheet for the coming day at the end of the previous day. I'll drop that stuff in there. I'll come out and do a little bit of block planning for what the next day might look like. And I like doing that at the end of the day, because then that's when I have the best idea of what tomorrow might look like. Every now and then you'll find me create a day sheet for 2 days in advance or something like that, especially when I know there's no way I can get a hold of this tomorrow, but I can take care of it the next day. So let me just go ahead while my brain is at this level and start the block planning for that. But that's how I build out my day, and that's how I do my day. Hope this has been helpful. Hope this has been informative. I hope this conversation helps you find healthy ministry through strategic productivity. Friends, I'm stoked to have you on as part of this journey. If the Productive Pastor Planner Template Pack is interesting, make sure to go to the show notes, grab that link, get on the wait list, get that content, and then find out when the card opens on May 24th, when the product's released to the world. And if not, just enjoy. As always, thankful so much for being part of this. Come hang out with us in the Productive Pastor community on Facebook, where we got over 1,000 pastors that are talking together about what does it mean to live the called life and have fun as ministers. As always, I'm Chad Brooks. Thank you so much for being part of this episode, and and I'll see you later on.